Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Film East Chats from Lowestoft Film Festival. I'm Shelby Cooke, head curator and editor-in-chief at Film East. We're very excited to be working with Lowestoft Film Festival this year to bring you content before, during, and after the film festival. Lowestoft is Britain's most easternly film festival that brings together independent filmmakers and celebrates all things film and the industry as a whole. It's a really exciting place to discover new emerging talent and those independent creatives that have yet to be discovered. And speaking of which, we have the opportunity here on this episode of Film East Chats to speak to some of those filmmakers and creatives. In this two-part episode, we're going to bring you 4 unique interviews that featured the directors, the stars, writers, and more from 4 of the film festival's nominated films. These interviews will go out before the festival launches on October 20th, providing you with some content to get you excited for the films that are screening at Lowestoft. During the festival, my fellow programmer, Neve Brooke, will be in Lowestoft to host an in-person Q&A during the Queer Shorts presentation on Saturday, October 21st. And then finally, after the festival, Neve and I will come together to discuss our overall thoughts of the festival and some of the films that we saw and what we enjoyed. So do please enjoy this special episode featuring interviews from the creative teams behind the short films Jigging, Typical, I Am Light, and Beyond Desire. In this final interview, I had a really great conversation with Vasilisa Forbes, who is the director, writer, and producer of Beyond Desire. Beyond Desire is an experimental short about female desire, shame, and betrayal. Drawing on a highly personal experience, the film follows a vulnerable young woman experiencing a breakdown via a collision of conflicting relationships and gender power struggles. The film is this really beautiful dance piece that is filmed entirely in black and white. There is no dialogue in the film, and the story is told entirely through the movement of the actors, the use of music and sound, as well as the set design and the atmosphere that's created. It's truly an experimental film in all senses of the word, and it's really just a beautifully multi-layered art piece that on its surface, doesn't force any sort of idea on you, and instead asks you as the viewer to project the narrative and to project your own experiences and feelings onto it. Vasilisa does a really wonderful job of explaining how the film comes about and the sort of metaphors and themes that play throughout the film. So I think this is a really interesting conversation to listen to if you are someone who appreciates art films and wants to understand more of the process behind creating an experimental film. Beyond Desire is part of the Bodies and Relationship strand at Lowestoft, and it will be showing on Saturday, the 21st of October at 11 a.m. at Lowestoft Center for Over 60s. So without further ado, please enjoy our final interview direct from Lowestoft Film Festival with Vasilisa Forbes and her film Beyond Desire.
My name is Vasilisa Forbes, and I'm the director and writer and actually producer of the film. The film is called Beyond Desire, and it's an experimental movement-based film, so it centers around dance and physical movement.
So how did the film come about? What made you want to create this type of experimental film?
Yeah, so the film came from a need to express an emotional experience I had. So I was going through this sort of inner emotional journey that was really very difficult for me and quite overwhelming. And it involved relationships with other people. It involved like a sort of confusion of emotions, like misplaced romantic intentions and desire, and this sort of confusion of the self and sense of shame and things like that. And I was looking for ways to express that in an artistic format, because for me it was really important to put that out so that I wasn't kind of carrying it all within my soul, basically. And my background is making music videos, and also short films, but music videos predominantly because I actually get paid to do those, whereas short films is more of a creative output. So obviously it kind of feeds in quite smoothly because this film is essentially a bit like a music video in that there isn't any dialogue and it's all told with the sound as also the protagonist. You know, the sound gives you that emotional journey, and it's movement based and it's very visual. So not so far off from a music video, really. So it's the same way of kind of expressing myself, I think. And so essentially, the film is a visual and mood based depiction of the emotions that I was going through, the sort of the inner struggle I was going through, and told through the performers, told through the dancers, the black and white aspect, the stark landscapes, and all of these things are symbols for the inner emotional landscape that I was feeling. So when you see in the film aspects like the burnt out house and the sort of the really sparse, empty natural landscape and the industrial electrical forms and things like that, these are all like big symbols for that emotional landscape within as well. And
Yeah.
the dark void space that's like the sort of the chaotic dream, um, which exists in its own vortex that you feel like you can't escape. And these are the kind of things I was going through emotionally. I was sort of in a, I was writing these diaries and I was in like an emotional vortex that I felt I couldn't escape. And that's that dark void space that you see in the middle of the film. And yeah, and actually, even as I was saying that moment about the burnt out house, I kind of felt like I was like, oh, because
Yeah.
that's so significant for me as well.
No, that's really powerful. And I think putting that into the context of how this dystopian sort of barren landscape that you see the protagonist in really does encapsulate your emotional space. And I think that's really powerful once you put that into context, and you see that in and you understand that. So there's obviously the film is very movement heavy, but there's also no dialogue in the film at all. So why did you want to tell the story in a sort of non-traditional way with just the movement versus having at least some sort of dialogue?
Yeah, well, originally I did write a script with dialogue, and as I started to develop the idea, and also considering the funds I had, which was just personal finance, personal money that I'd saved up to make the film, dialogue was going to add another element of difficulty that essentially I couldn't afford to do. So there was a dialogue-based version. Then, as I spoke to and collaborated with the choreographer, whose name is Katia Borvis, as we started to sort of dig into it, experiment, and talk about the concept, we realized that actually the dialogue doesn't feel necessary anymore because everything is told through the physical expression. There are parts of it that feel like they would be much more clear and precise with dialogue, and you'd be able to sort of really know exactly what's going on, and things would be sort of really linear. But I don't think this film really needed that. It didn't need to be so explicitly linear. And I enjoy the fact that it is more of an emotion based piece. You can watch it and feel something emotional. You can take away from it a mood, and you can also interpret your own interpretation of it, really, which I think dialogue is obviously very specific, and you just get the sense of the story, which is also great. But with this film, I don't think it needed it. So that's why we decided to omit any dialogue and focus entirely on the dance and see the emotion told just through the physical expressions, the face, the gestures, and the lighting and everything else apart from words.
It does really embrace that experimental side. I think some of the other films at the festival that have been labeled as experimental still are very traditional in their narrative and the way that they project their story. And I think this film really is experimental and encapsulates that sort of artistic performance and way of expressing a story through other means of other than what we're used to as humans with having that conversation back and forth.
Yeah, thank you.
So I was really interested in the inclusion of the female relationship between the dancers that you have in the story. Um, why can you first kind of explore the relationship between the women and sort of how they relate to the other characters and what's happening in the narrative?
Yeah, so I wanted to involve initially I was going to involve two older actors alongside the lead protagonist so that there was this confusion of whether these were her partners, her
Mm.
peers, or even her parents. And that's pretty much what I wanted to carry across with the woman played by the brilliant Serena Simone, as a little bit older than the lead protagonist, so that we get this sense of uncertainty as to their relationship and dynamic. And it's definitely talking about the issue we have within relationships between women when it comes to sexual competition or the sexual sphere. And oftentimes we do talk about how the problems women face with men and the gender struggle, but we also rarely talk about that internalized misogyny that women have against each other and the rivalry, which is really sad and unfortunate. It comes from upbringing and certain sense of competition and fear and doubt and insecurity, and can manifest itself in all kinds of ways. And they can be really unhealthy, toxic ways that these things then become presented in a physical way. So Serena's character is almost like a toxic mother figure
Mm.
in a way, who's luring her daughter or her protege into an environment that's uncomfortable, but also she's sort of pushing her and she's undressing her and
Mm.
she's sexualizing her and she's trying to encourage her to let go, but also to kind of reveal herself in a way that maybe isn't helpful for the protagonist, played by Patricia. And I remember actually in the script, I had a line um, this before when it was dialogue based, which was Serena's character saying like, look at yourself in the mirror and expose yourself, like
Mm.
expose yourself. And that's what you see happening physically
Mm.
in the performances. And we also have these two male characters who are there, like the voyeurs, the gaze, the male gaze. They're there to applaud and to view and to be performed for. And the two women are essentially performing for them, and sort of it's like a striptease almost, but being led by another woman. And I think we do see that a lot in reality and in
Yeah.
society. And so that's what's going on there.
Yeah, that's definitely the interpretation that I got, is how, and I think this is something that's not talked about a lot between women, and particularly in this conversation that we're having socially about um, like the Me Too movement and how women are perceived as these sort of sexual objects, is we don't really discuss how other women play in that role, and how just as toxic women can be in sexualizing women as much as men can be towards sexualizing women.
Definitely. And also that sort of self-objectification that women
Mm.
perform. I mean, we do it every day when we wear makeup, like I'm doing now, but this sort of sense of like self-objectification alongside other women and them objectifying each other as well in the presence of men.
Yeah.
Sort of like being this kind of like lineup of like, oh, choose me type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's also what's going on in this vortex. There's a sort of jealousy and rivalry as well that you can see in the performance as the women switch between the male characters. So, um, when Patricia's character feels a great sense of rejection and she's cast away from the group, she looks over and sees the other women, with the other men, and she sees herself as contradicted by that. So, it's almost like a sense that we either coexist as objects for the men, or there's a rivalry rather than an actual like sisterhood or unity. So it's kind of commenting on that essentially. And it's something I'm trying to challenge in my own life as well, because there's
Yeah.
a lot of these things that come up naturally for me and have done in my past. Jealousy and sort of sexual rivalry with other women, I'm not immune to it. It happens to me all the time. And recently, I've had experiences where I've really challenged myself on that and found myself coming through the other side, where I'm actually feel myself uniting with women that I used to be afraid of or
Mm.
compare myself to, and actually letting go of those comparisons is literally saving my life. And I absolutely love it. So I think it's such an interesting journey. And I think a lot of that also comes from structures of patriarchal romantic
Yeah.
relationship in society. And when you take that away, then it's less important. So yeah, no, I think it's exciting that people are talking about these things more and
Mhm.
more. It's opening up a lot more fluid relationships and fluid ways of people loving each other. That doesn't mean that these conflicts need to be so prevalent. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the other questions that came to mind while I was watching your film was women being able to discuss their sexuality, and not necessarily posing it for a male gaze. And I think that's something that we're seeing a lot more in popular media. So we have shows like Fleabag or films like Promising Young Woman, where women's sexuality and women using sex and enjoying sex is being accepted more in this sort of artistic conversation. Um, why did you want to particularly? I mean, I guess there's really no obvious clues that the film is about sexuality, other than the dynamic between the characters. But why did you want to sort of explore this conversation of sexuality with your film?
Yeah, well, it's something that has been uh, basically at some points in my life, I've thought maybe the sort of the battle or the struggle or whatever you want to call it, the kind of the sort of the thing of my life is to work through female sexuality. That seems to have
Mm.
been a theme through all of my life. It's challenge. Um, it's something that seems to be there every day. I sort of feel like I need to confront it every day. And therefore it's like I can't live without speaking about it.
Mm.
It just isn't possible. I think it depends on the person. There are other people that, like, for them sex is something very private, and um it's something they do with their partner, and it's great, and they can compartmentalize, and they have their life and they have their sex life, and it's all sort of in these kind of boxes. But I feel like as soon as I step out into the world, the question of myself as a sexual woman is always confronted to me, like just throughout my teenagehood and as an adult woman. I don't personally know why, but I think a lot of women have that, and they're talking about it more and more. I was recently watching Michaela Cole's "I May
Mm.
Destroy You," which I never watched back when it came out, which was like maybe 2020 or something like that. Never watched it back then, and probably wasn't actually ready to. I think,
Yeah.
and I think maybe if I'd watched it then, it wouldn't have affected me in a positive
Mm.
way that it has now. And I recently went sober. So I've been sober since January, which is quite a long time now, which is great.
Congratulations.
Thank you. watching watching Michaela Cole, which I literally started 2 weeks ago. Um, Seeing that representation, I was like, oh my god, I'm so glad she was able to represent herself in that way.
Mm.
That's the kind of character I've been waiting for. Like a character that is intense, is messy, is fluid and free, maybe a little bit masculine as well, and strong, but also vulnerable. Like
Mhm.
I'm so excited by that character because I felt so much kinship with that character. I was like, that's how I feel, how I felt for a very long time. I feel really strong, but also really vulnerable. I feel really like messy, but sometimes put together. And it just felt great to see that character. I mean, I've only got halfway through, so I don't know what happens later. So obviously I don't. But I'm just glad that she was able to express that everyone is valid and you don't have to be a victim, like
Mm.
in this stereotypical way, to be valid. You can be
Yeah.
messy and still be hurt. And that's valid too. Because I think having, like, that's why I mentioned the sobriety as well, like having been in situations that I've been blamed for, which is also why the character in this film is essentially, she's meant to be like hungover throughout the
Mm.
process. the sort of element of drinking wine and stuff like that. Sometimes people lean on that as a way of saying like, oh, well, you're a mess and therefore your pain doesn't actually matter because if you can't look after yourself, why do you expect anybody else to respect you or respect your boundaries or your body or whatever? And I think that's what Michaela's saying. It's like, I can be messy and that's sort of my problem, but that doesn't mean I deserve to be violated or abused by society just because I am a woman who maybe likes to party or
Yeah.
whatever it is. That's a silly way of putting it, but like everything is valid. So I'm really excited by those representations, and I'm glad that these stories are being put out there. And I think, yeah, society is not completely ready for it, and sometimes they don't get it. But the more conversations we have, the better, and the
And
more different representations of women we have, the better as well.
yeah, and the more we can put women in charge of these sort of narratives and allow them to tell their stories, I think is where we're going to see this, like Michaela Cole being able to say something that's so powerful in such a really beautiful, raw, honest
Exactly.
way.
Yeah, exactly. And let it be from her gaze and not from
Exactly.
someone else's gaze looking at her. Yeah. So
What I would say, we've discussed a lot about what you want audiences to take away, but sort of the very initial thing that you want audiences right after they see the film, what do you want them to be thinking about with your film?
mm, well, I think it's great when people just take away whatever it is they take away. I think that's the best thing. I think yeah, I don't think I actually want to impose any kind of
Mm.
feeling. I think I would love for people to have different interpretations when they step away from it. I think sometimes it's I've had films in the past, particularly a project I did called Wax Chick, where some people just really didn't like it, and I think that was
Mm.
quite cool too. To have people like viscerally hate it was kind of interesting because it just reflects on personal projections and sense of threat or whatever, and that's kind of interesting as well. This film isn't as shocking as that, so it's
Yeah.
not going to have that kind of impact, I don't think. But I mean, I think a friend of mine said she took away a sense of sadness, which is not particularly exciting, but it is like true to the emotional state. So that's quite interesting. Um, I would have loved if I'd had more budget to spare and more time and everything like that, which always directors are going to say. But
Mhm.
I would have loved to have journeyed through, which I'd like to do in a feature script version I have of this film. Would have loved to journey from the darkness into the light. So this kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
like becoming of this character. So in the feature script, which is this is like a mood film version of, the character exists in this dark spiral vortex for quite a while, but in the second half of the film, she really becomes a beam of light, and she really
Mm.
becomes an empowered version of herself, and she really journeys away from all these toxic shame-based cycles. And that's what I would love to have got to in the short, but there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
So if I'd been able to do that, then I think it would have been a journey, downwards and then back up, and it would have given people a sense of like, hope and encouragement. Whereas I think, unfortunately, this film maybe feels quite like it stays in that darker place. So you kind
Yeah.
of walk away being like, oh, okay, oh, like, ow. But that can be beautiful too, like a
Yeah.
bittersweet sort of feeling. So I think that's
Hmm.
probably what you get from it.
And sometimes you have to have that sort of, you have to watch that sadness in order to process your own sort of sadness that you have within you.
Exactly. Sometimes you want to listen to like some really sad music from
Yeah.
Elliot or whatever. You just want to like descend and be like so this can be that kind of film where you just want to like
And
on a great
it's
day.
so moody too that it really does evoke those sort of emotions like
Yeah,
like music would.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's why
Um,
music's great, and sometimes you don't need dialogue. So
exactly. Um, so the last question that I've been asking all the creatives that we've interviewed during this project, um, Filmies, so we obviously work with a lot of young people, but we're not necessarily a filmmaking organization. And I do have a lot of people typically coming to us just because we have film in our title, so they think that we're making films. I do have a lot of people coming to us asking like, oh, how can I get started on making my own film? What sort of opportunities can I use to become a filmmaker? So I really want to take these opportunities whenever I'm talking with creatives in the industry. and get their perspective on it, and how what advice you would give to someone who maybe just finished uni, wants to get started in their filmmaking career. What would you suggest be the first step in getting a young person started?
Well, I think a lot of people are really proactive these days
Mm-hmm.
with just making stuff. And that really is what it is. Like when I was younger, my family were just really trying to encourage me to go to uni and do like institutional stuff, which is also really useful, but not everyone has the access to institutional stuff and bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like so many people have a phone. Most people have a phone, an iPhone or whatever kind of phone, Google phone, whatever, but just shoot stuff on the phone and like make little stories on the phone, and you can do it vertical or horizontal, and you can write a script, short script, couple of pages, even if it's like 3 pages, so each page is a minute, so if you have 3 pages you've got 3 minutes. Get the phone and just make it with your friends, and then you've got a film basically. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the time people think you need to have something glossy and like high end and put together, but everybody always tells me like story is king. The story is everything. So you can make a stunning high fashion looking film, but if it doesn't have a story, it's just a nice picture.
Mm-hmm.
And the films of mine that have been the most successful for me have been the ones that, like the Wax Chick film, wasn't even a film to begin with. It was just a series of images that I kind of edited together, but I had a deep intention and I had like an important drive, and I just really wanted to do something with it that was meaningful, and I had a meaningful intention for it, and that made it really resonate with people. Whereas it didn't actually involve any expensive cameras, it didn't involve anything really like that. It was just the fact that I had meaning to it. So I'm actually planning to do something on a phone next. I actually did a film that I finished, which is like feature length, but we'll see if anyone actually wants to watch it. But it's all shot on a phone, but it's made up of like it's like a memoir. It's like made up of, for example, it's like a giant Instagram reel or something. It's
Mm.
just made up of like footage of random stuff that goes on and on. But it's like a collection of memories. And I mean, that cost £0. I already had the phone and I was just, recording things that meant something to me, and I put a voiceover over it. And I think that's stunning. I love it personally. I think it's an awesome film. I think it's one of my favorite films. I prefer it to this film even. Um, and so yeah, I don't think you need any tools. Use the tools you have, and just have fun with it and just try something. And as long as you have a meaningful intention, people will resonate with it, I think. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that is a really good sentiment to end on. You have a gorgeous film. Hopefully, a lot of people will go and see it while it's screening at Lowestoft. And thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with us and to give us your perspective.
I'm so glad I was able to talk, and the questions were amazing. So I'm really happy to be able to share my thoughts. Yeah, thank you so much.